Chapter 11. The Capture. As Amber turned onto the county road, Alan said, 10:39, emergency, lights and siren. But drive past the Calford farmhouse. I'll look for a vehicle, not part of the farm. Amber simply replied, 10:4. Both deputies were grim as they sped down the gravel road. Amber said, there's the farmhouse. Look, there's that tan Ford. Alan replied, keep going about a mile. We'll walk back and approach the house from the rear. Amber replied, 10:4. Alan keyed his radio, dispatch, this is Unit MV03. 1078, need assistance, 1033, emergency, 1040, no lights or siren. Stop and walk the last mile. Advise 10109, camouflage. Dispatch replied, 10-4. The two officers armed themselves, Amber with a .30-30 and Alan with a 12-gauge, choked down like a rifle. Before they began their trip back to the farmhouse, they blackened their faces and covered their uniform shirts with black turtleneck sweaters. They ran most of the way back, but when they came into view of the farmhouse, they dropped and did a combat low crawl, taking as long as 15 minutes to reach the house. It was dark by the time they arrived at the farmhouse. The two officers carefully inched up to a window and peeked in. What they saw made their blood run cold. Gerald Kramer sat in a recliner, the Calford's youngest little girl on his lap with a knife poised at her throat. The husband, wife, and two other children sat across the room, terrified, stock still. As they watched, across the house to the other window, they saw Sheriff Murdoch. Alan brought up his shotgun and aimed it at Kramer, calmly saying, Kramer, don't move. Kramer started, looking at the window, I'll kill this brat. The sheriff poked his shotgun through the window, you move, and I'll blow your head off. Alan said, Cindy, go to your mother. Then to Amber, he whispered, can you get a clear shot? She replied, I can hit him in the eye right now. Kramer tightened his grip on the little girl, making a small cut on her throat, I'll kill her. Amber shouted, Kramer, I've got a .30-30 aimed right at your eye. Let the girl go, or I'll pull the trigger. I'll count 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kramer dropped his arms and the knife. Under Sheriff Johnson came alongside Alan, the sheriff wants you two to take this guy into custody. This is your caller. Leave your rifles with me. Alan and Amber went around to the front of the house and entered, pistols drawn. The family sat hugging little Cindy. Regina was crying with relief. Oh, Alan, Amber, I am so glad to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Alan never took his eyes off Kramer. Stand up. Partner, cuff him. Kramer started to turn, but Alan barked, don't move. Step forward 2 steps and put your hands behind your back. Don't move. I can't miss at this distance. Amber quickly cuffed the suspect and pushed him forward. About that time, Sheriff Murdoch stepped into the house. Alan, George is bringing your patrol car up. This is a righteous caller. I'm proud of you both, good work. Regina asked, Sheriff, may I hug these two heroes? The sheriff smiled and pulled his pistol and aimed it at Kramer. Hug away, Regina. She hugged Amber and kissed her. Thank you, Amber, thank you. Then Regina turned and hugged Alan and kissed him. Thank you, Alan, I knew you would understand when I called. Thank you, thank you. Alan returned the hug and kiss and replied, we'll talk later. But you have to know we are so glad it all worked out like this. Arnold Calford shook the sheriff's hand. Thank you, Sheriff, you and your officers, thank you. George arrived with Alan and Amber's patrol car. Kramer was put into the back seat. Then Alan said, ready? Amber replied, ready. Alan said, rock, paper, scissors. Alan slapped his fist in his hand, and Amber slapped her hand down open. Aha, I win. I drive. Alan smiled. Okay, she returned. 10:39, emergency, lights and siren. Sheriff Murdoch stuck his head in the window. 10:39. But 10:40, run silent, in town. Alan and Amber replied, 10-4 Sheriff. And away they went. Arriving at the sheriff's office, Alan and Amber took Kramer in and booked him. Fingerprinted him, photographed him, confiscated his clothing, inventoried his belongings, and put him in a cell. He was allowed no sheet, no pillow, no blanket, and he wore a prison orange jumpsuit. He was allowed no means of suicide. Both Alan and Amber were elated, tired, exhausted, but elated. Amber hugged Alan and patted his butt and said, tomorrow, partner? Alan kissed her cheek. Yeah, tomorrow. Good night. It was very late when they had parted. Amber got home and found Paul waiting for her. Wide-eyed, she said, Paul, it's late. He replied, I wanted to wait. Hungry? She replied, oh yes, starved. What is there to eat? He winked, enchiladas okay? He took her in his arms, and she began to cry and laugh. Paul, we caught the blankety blank. Sheriff Murdoch gave Alan and me the right to cuff and book the POS. Paul just held her tight and rejoiced with her. He never mentioned her use of the vulgarities. Alan walked into the house, and Susan met him at the door. What happened? He responded, we caught Kramer. Amber and I caught the POS. She replied, Alan, your language. Sheepishly he replied, sorry. But that's the strongest expression I could think of to express my opinion of him. He has got to be the worst criminal I've ever had to deal with. Susan held on to Alan, I'm so proud of you. And just think this cop is my husband. Alan smiled, I love you, Dr. Smith. I have the most wonderful wife in all God's creation. You save little kids' lives, every day. I'm very proud of you, too. Alan and Susan talked while they made up a couple of sandwiches. Alan, what would be the best news you could get right now, besides about Kramer? Alan thought for a minute and grinned a big grin. The best news I could get would be that you're pregnant. She started, how did you know? He replied, I didn't. I guessed. I guess I've been hoping it would happen. When? She answered, David said about 7 months. What would you like her to look like? Alan raised an eyebrow. Her. How about a boy? She answered, but I want a daughter. Alan smiled, you know what? I'm going to pray for a healthy baby. Just imagine, our little girl would grow up to be tall, willowy, and beautiful, just like her mother. Susan smiled, our boy would be a big man, well-muscled, handsome, like his father. They just stood there holding each other, so much in love and at this moment, very happy. It didn't take long for the jurisdictional arguments over Kramer to begin. Lake County thought that they should be the venue to try and hang Kramer. Henry County contended that he had committed a murder in their county. They should have a piece of Kramer. Of course, Sheriff Murdoch argued that the first crime was done in Mountain View County, and that his department had been responsible for identifying and capturing Kramer, that Mountain View County should be the place where he would be tried. One morning as the sheriff's department held the daily briefing, 2 men in suits came in and asked to speak to the sheriff. Sheriff Murdoch said, I'm right here. You want to speak to me, speak. One man flashed his badge and held out a piece of paper. Sheriff Murdoch, we are with the FBI, and we have a court order to take Gerald Kramer into custody. Kidnapping a little girl, taking her across state lines for sexual abuse is a federal offense. Sheriff Murdoch took the paper, the court order, and tore it into 4 pieces and threw it into the wastebasket. The FBI was not even interested while we did all the hard work on this case. The families of the victims live within 20 miles of here in Mountain View County. Kramer is going to be tried and hung right here. Now, gentlemen, get out of my county, or you are going to be guests in my jail. The FBI agent said, Sheriff, this is a big mistake. Sheriff Murdoch turned to Alan, Sergeant Smith, you and Corporal Clark escort these 2 gentlemen to their vehicle, please. Alan and Amber touched the men on the arm and signed for them to walk out. The one agent turned and said, your sheriff is making a big mistake. You are making a big mistake. The second agent twisted away from Amber and found himself face down on the ground with Amber's knee in his back. Alan smiled, you want to get it on right here? The first agent replied, no. Harry, let's go. We'll let the bureau handle this. The second agent replied, okay, if this deputy would take her knee off my back. Amber let the agent up and stood back as the 2 FBI agents got in their car and drove off. As Alan and Amber arrived back in the briefing room, they heard Sheriff Murdoch on the phone. Jim, this is our case, this is your case. We can't let the feds just walk in and take over. There was a pause, then, if you won't call the governor, I will. Again, a pause, then, all right, Jim, please let me know what the governor says. Then the sheriff turned to Alan and Amber, we've got a jurisdictional war on our hands, and we might lose. Amber replied, at least we have the satisfaction of knowing we caught the blankety blank. We did our job, and, come what may, we know that our department was responsible for the capture of the POS. The sheriff was silent for a long time, looking at his 2 deputies. Then he smiled, let's get to work. And he turned and walked into his office, I want to see you 2 on patrol. They were assigned to patrol the 3 other little towns in the county. As they drove along the streets of the towns, the folks would wave and holler, Alan, Amber, good job. In the town of Twin Peaks, the town constable waved them down. Alan, Amber, I hear the feds tried to take Kramer away. Amber replied, yeah, but Sheriff Murdoch told them where to go. We heard him talking to the district attorney, and he told him to call the governor. The constable answered, well, you know the whole county knows who did the job, and it wasn't the feds. We know who we can depend on. Have a good day, guys. Alan replied, thanks, enjoy the day. Alan and Amber went on to patrol the towns of Grace and Whitmore with the same greetings from their friends and neighbors. As they drove, Alan turned to Amber, Susan gave me some terrific news last night. She answered, she's pregnant. He asked, how did you know? She said, I was in David's office when he told her. I am so happy for you and Susan. I wish I could have another, but such is life. Well, you might have thought the feds would have won the jurisdictional war, but the governor stood his ground as did the federal court, but a compromise was achieved. A federal judge would preside over the trial in the Mountain View County Courthouse. Sheriff Murdoch and his deputies would serve as court officers, and the Mountain View County Clerk and Recorder would serve as the court clerk and recorder. Every citizen of Mountain View County, Henry County, and Lake County were satisfied. Interested parties, witnesses, law enforcement officers who were involved in the case would not have to travel to some distant courtroom to testify or witness the proceedings. The CSI agents from both states were satisfied as well, even though the accommodations would be stretched to the limit. However, Alan and Amber asked their friends from the State Bureau CSI lab to stay with them. The Mountain View County prosecutor, James Harrington, Esquire, would be involved working with and assisting the federal prosecutor. Gerald Kramer had requested a defense attorney from the far end of the state, which made things a lot easier for everyone. The jury pool was selected from the far end of the state as well. The judge felt that it would be easier to find 12 good citizens, tried and true, who harbored no preconceived ideas or prejudices concerning the case. Day in and day out, they worked. The jury selection was more difficult than even the judge, Sheriff Murdoch, Jim Harrington, Esquire, and the federal prosecutor had ever imagined. The jury pool was refreshed 6 times. But, finally, after a month of working to select a jury and 2 alternates, the jury was sworn in and impaneled. Then began the trial. Gerald Kramer pleaded, not guilty, and the prosecution began by calling Amber to testify. The first words of the prosecutor were, Your Honor, Corporal Clark, Sergeant Smith, and many others were involved in many aspects of this case. I request the right to recall any of them to the stand, to clarify some issue, and to introduce another aspect of this case in which they were involved. The judge nodded, granted. The prosecution began, Corporal Clark, please describe the day and your observations when you found the body of Debra Jean Laccy. Amber replied, Alan, Sergeant Smith and I were patrolling the county roads. The prosecutor interrupted, why was Sergeant Smith patrolling with you? Amber blinked, Alan, Sergeant Smith was recently injured, shot, and left for dead. He was recovering, and Sheriff Murdoch had ordered Sergeant Smith and me to work together until the doctor released him to full active duty. Again, the prosecutor, I see. Did Sergeant Smith's injury have anything to do with this case? Amber replied, no. The prosecutor, I see. Please continue. Amber went on to describe the events of that day, including Sheriff Murdoch's decision to call in the state's Bureau of Investigation CSI. The prosecutor ended his questions and turned the defense counsel, your witness. The defense counsel rose and spoke to Amber, Corporal Clark. I noticed that you called Sergeant Smith by his first name several times. Are you romantically involved with Sergeant Smith? The prosecutor jumped up, objection, Your Honor, relevance. The defense counsel responded, just trying to see if there is the possibility that either Corporal Clark or Sergeant Smith might be swayed by the other in this case. The judge responded, Counselor, in my court, you will not question the honor, integrity, or honesty of any individual without grounds. These officers protect and serve. They will be respected at all times, and anything other than that will be considered a severe breach of these proceedings. Do you understand? Counselor, your objection is sustained. Amber looked at the judge. Your Honor, I would like to clarify Sergeant Smith's and my relationship, if I may. The judge replied, by all means. Amber continued, Sergeant Smith's first name is Alan. He has been my partner for over 10 years. Alan was my training officer and my friend when I began as a sheriff's deputy. He was the first, after Sheriff Murdoch, to accept me as a police officer without reservation. Alan has saved my life at least 6 times in those 10 years, and I have saved his life as many times in those 10 years. We have shared our lunches, our sorrows, and joys, and we have shared our hearts. The day we found Debra Jean Laccy, we pledged to be brother and sister as long as we both live. I love Alan. He is my brother, as he loves me, his sister. Alan replied, "Real love is doing the very best for the one you love regardless of the cost to yourself. I would give my life for my sister. I would give my life for my wife." The defense counsel returned to her seat. The trial ground on and on. Testimony was given by all the police officers involved in the case, by the state police captain that oversaw Alan and Amber's CSI training and the effort to identify the individual that matched the fingerprints found at all 3 crime scenes. The massive effort to integrate the schoolchildren's fingerprint data that had been collected by the state police for the Department of Education so many years before. Testimony was given by the Henry County Sheriff and his department and by the local and other state CSI agents. The trial was in its 5th week when Gerald Kramer leaned over and spoke to his attorney. At that point, the judge looked over and asked, "Counselor?" She stood and spoke, "Your Honor, I ask for an adjournment in order to confer with the prosecutor. My client wishes to change his plea." The prosecutor nodded, and the judge rapped his gavel. "Court is adjourned until 9 tomorrow morning." Gerald Kramer and his attorney walked to the prosecutor's table. Mr. Kramer will change his plea to guilty with 2 stipulations. The 2 prosecutors glanced at each other, and those stipulations are? She answered, "First, he will not allocute, describe his actions before or during the commission of the acts stipulated in the indictment, nor his reasoning. Second, the death penalty is off the table." Jim spoke up. "Most folks around here want to see Kramer hung publicly. Many believe hanging is too good for him. Perhaps we should take the deal. He'll spend the rest of his life in solitary." She asked, "Why solitary?" The federal prosecutor replied, "His fellow inmates won't take too kindly to having a child rapist and murderer in their prison if you get my drift." She looked at Kramer and lifted an eyebrow. Gerald Kramer nodded. She said, "He will take the deal." With that, the deputies on duty took Kramer back to his cell. Everyone else left the courtroom. The defense counselor spotted Amber, Alan, and their spouses standing on the courthouse steps. She approached them. "Corporal Clark, Sergeant Smith, please accept my apology." Amber and Alan smiled at her. Amber spoke, "Of course. Really, I was glad to have our relationship brought out in such a public forum. I'm sure many of our citizens had the same question. Now, I hope it will stop the wagging tongues." The counselor went on, "My name is, well, just plain Jane Graham. I sure wish I had a brother or a friend like you and Sergeant Smith." 9 o'clock the next day in the courtroom, and Gerald Kramer changed his plea to guilty on all counts and specifications, the prosecution having explained the bargain, which had been arrived at the previous day. The judge sentenced Kramer to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gerald Kramer was transferred to the federal prison in the far side of the state, there to spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. As Gerald Kramer was led away, the judge addressed the court. "I know that many of you wanted to see Gerald Kramer executed for his crimes. I want you to know that he will spend the rest of his life alone. He will see only his jailers. This is because his fellow inmates would take extreme exception to having a child rapist and murder in their midst. This punishment will be far worse than a public execution." Later, Sheriff Murdoch called Alan and Amber into his office. "Well, this case is finished. Now I want you 2 to resume your classes in forensic science. You will still be our CSI." The sheriff turned to Alan. "Alan, I'd like to ask Susan to be our medical examiner, with your okay." Alan paused a moment. "What about the baby?" The sheriff replied, "I talked to Amanda, and she would just love to watch your baby. What do you think?" Alan thought and spoke, "It's up to her, ask her. I'll go along with whatever she wants." Sheriff Murdoch did ask Susan to be the medical examiner, and she agreed. The idea that Amanda would care for their children was agreeable to Susan and Alan. After all, Roger spent a great deal of time with Teresa in the Murdoch home.